PyInstaller splashscreen.png, the splash screen image. Each of these is paired with a destination path, in this case dath, which means they'll be copied into the same directory as the executable when PyInstaller builds the app. This is how we make sure those files are available at runtime. The rest of the fields, binaries, hidden imports, hookspath, and so on, are left empty for now. These are used in more advanced scenarios, like when your project relies on hidden dependencies or external binary files. For this project, they're not necessary. Finally, you can see the line pyz equals pyz.co. This is simply PyInstaller's way of compressing the pure Python code so that it can be included inside the bundle. You normally don't need to touch this section either. So in summary, this part of the spec file is making sure that when you build the app, your main script, your icon, and your splash screen image are all included in the packaged executable. This new section of the spec file is creating a splash screen configuration for PyInstaller itself. While earlier we coded a splash screen directly in PySide6, PyInstaller also has its own splash mechanism that shows an image while the executable is being unpacked. This prevents the user from staring at a blank screen while waiting for the application to load. Here you see the splash block. The very first argument is the file name of the splash image, PyInstaller splashscreen.png. This tells PyInstaller which image to display as soon as the user launches the executable. After that, you can see several parameters being passed in. The binaries and data's values ensure that any required resources, including your splash screen and icon, are included. Then there are visual options. Text pose is set to none, which means no loading text will be shown on top of the splash. The text size and text color parameters are there in case you wanted to display text, for example, loading, but here you've simply chosen a plain white text style with no actual text. Finally, there's minify script true. This just tells PyInstaller to compress the code that manages the splash screen so that it stays small and efficient. So in short, this section tells PyInstaller, before showing the actual application, display this image as a splash screen. Combined with your PySide6 Splash, this gives a seamless experience. The PyInstaller Splash shows first while the app is unpacking, and then your PySide6 Splash takes over once the app itself starts running. This section of the spec file is where PyInstaller actually defines how your executable will be built. It starts with the exe call, and you can see that it takes in several arguments. The first one, PIZs, represents the compressed Python code that PyInstaller prepared earlier. Then we have a.scripts, which includes the entry point, in this case your main.py. Next, a binaries, a zip files, and a datas ensure that any supporting files are bundled in. Notice also that splash is included here, which links the splash configuration we defined in the previous step. This is what makes sure the PyInstaller splash screen shows up before your PySide6 Splash takes over. A few lines further down, you'll see the name of the executable, PyInstaller splash screen. This is the file name that will be generated when you build the project. There are also some flags here that control how the executable is created. For example, debug false means you're building a normal release version rather than a debug build. Strip false tells PyInstaller not to strip symbols, which helps with compatibility. And upx true enables UPX compression if UPX is installed on your system, making the executable smaller in size. One of the most important parameters is at the bottom, icon PyInstaller splashscreen.ico. This is what sets the application icon for the executable. Thanks to this line, when you run the program after packaging, both the File in Windows Explorer and the window title bar will use your custom icon instead of the default Python one. So, to summarize, the exe section is where PyInstaller ties everything together, your code, your resources, your splash, and your icon, into a single executable file. Open your internet browser, download the icon and splash screen files. To make it easier for you to follow along, I've prepared the icon and splash screen image that we'll be using in this project. These files are provided inside a single zip archive. Click on the link I've shared and download the zip file to your computer. Once the download is complete, extract its contents into your project folder. You should see two files, PyInstaller splashscreen.iso, the application icon, PyInstaller splashscreen.png, the splash screen image. Having these files in place will ensure that both the icon and splash screen work correctly when we build and run the application. Once you've downloaded and extracted the zip file, you should see two files: PyInstaller splashscreen.png, the splash screen image, PyInstaller splashscreen.ico, the application icon. Now place both of these files directly into your project's folder alongside main.py and the .spec file. This is important because both your Python code and the spec file are already set up to look for these files in the project's root directory. By keeping the files here with the exact same names, you'll ensure that the splash screen and icon work correctly when you run and later package the application. Now that your spec file is complete and the resources are in place, the next step is to build the executable. Open the terminal inside PyCharm and type the following command: pyinstaller PySide_icon_splash.spec, then press enter to run it. This command tells PyInstaller to use the PySide_icon_splash.spec file as the blueprint for packaging your project. PyInstaller will take your Python code, include all the required libraries, and bundle in the icon and splash screen files you configured earlier. When the process finishes, you'll find your newly created executable inside the dist folder that PyInstaller generates automatically. After PyInstaller finishes building, it creates two new folders in your project directory: Build and Dist. The Dist folder is the one that contains your packaged application. To open it, right-click on the Dist folder inside PyCharm's project panel. From the menu, choose Open in Explorer. This will open the folder in your system's file explorer. Inside the Dist folder, you'll find the executable file that PyInstaller just created. This is the file you can double-click to launch your application outside of PyCharm. Double-click on the dist folder, double-click on the executable file. When you launched the executable in the previous step, the first thing you should have seen is your splash screen image. This confirms that everything is working as expected. PyInstaller successfully bundled your resources, and the splash screen is being displayed right when the application starts. After a short moment, the splash screen will disappear, and your main application window will open. At this point, you should also notice that the window is using the custom icon you provided, both in the title bar and for the executable file itself. This smooth transition from splash screen to main window is the sign that your setup is complete and your application is running exactly as intended. On this screen, you can clearly see the final outcome of the project. The executable PyInstaller splashscreen.exe now has the custom icon you provided. When you run it, the same icon also appears in the Windows title bar and on the taskbar. This confirms that the .ico file was successfully applied to both the packaged application and the running window. In this tutorial, you learned how to create a new PySide6 project in PyCharm. Install and configure the necessary packages, including PySide6 and PyInstaller. Write Python code to display a splash screen and set a custom window icon. Use the resource path function to ensure resources work in both development and packaged modes. Configure a PyInstaller spec file to bundle your application together with its icon and splash image. Build a standalone executable that can run outside of PyCharm, complete with a splash screen and a custom icon. Congratulations! You've successfully built a polished desktop application with Python, PySide6, and PyInstaller. Thank you for following along with this tutorial. I hope it gave you both the confidence and the practical steps to create professional-looking applications of your own.